So you want to hear more about John Steinbeck? That sounds great. He is one of the most important authors in my life, and I think one of the most important in American letters, despite the controversies about his winning the Nobel Prize, which I'll cover at the end. But I'll go through most of his bibliography now, so this might be a long video, but it also, if you don't know him at all, or you know some of his more famous works, hopefully this will be a way to find the next thing or the first thing to read, because it's not difficult reading. Some of them are long, but it's always engrossing, and it's so socialist and on the side of the people somehow. He was just someone who had a big heart, and it came out in his writings. So the first book he did was a novel called Cup of Gold about the privateer slash pirate Henry Morgan. And then he had some shorter pieces, The Pastures of Heaven, To a God Unknown, but the one I would recommend is The Red Pony. This is 100 pages. It's one of the first things I ever read by him. It's something that a young adult could read. It's his memories of growing up in California, where much of his work is set. And it's a great intro into something very comprehensible from him. But then something kind of obscure but really fun was his 1935 novel, Tortilla Flat. This is basically King Arthur as set in Central California with a bunch of like kind of over the top guys who are walking around talking in very highfalutin language, even though they're kind of buffoons. It was great. It's an odd book. It's not a regular novel kind of thing, but I really liked it. That was another of the early ones that I did. But it was after that he started to write his Dust Bowl fiction, and these are certainly his most important works. This includes The Grapes of Wrath, which, if you don't mind big books, just read The Grapes of Wrath. There is a reason that's what cemented his place in U.S. history. Of Mice and Men, you might have read in high school. It's a very touching story and much more intimate about the Dust Bowl. And then In Dubious Battle is one that's not read as much, but In Dubious Battle is about the fight for the 40-hour work week and better working conditions. And he covers that so much in his writings. And not only is it so inspiring and can bring me to the point of tears to see the courage and heroism of these people fighting for the workers, as well as the depravities of the pushback against them by the Pinkertons and the bosses. It's also inspirational for today, that what we can do is make a difference to get to the 4-day work week, to get to better healthcare coverage, to get to universal basic income. This stuff is only ideas that could happen. It just takes a lot of work and activism. And so I try to bring light to the history of it to help us move forward. So those were really good ones. He also wrote a play like that, The Moon is Down. That was the only play I've read by him, but that was quite a good one. And then he meets Ed Ricketts. And so he is this biologist out of California who wrote this textbook, Between Pacific Tides, which is one of the greatest science books I've ever read. And Ed Ricketts is just a cool old dude who became a mentor to John Steinbeck, who would play music for him when Steinbeck was in his periodic depressions. And Ed Ricketts was a biologist and a philosopher, and had a new theory about ecology and everything being connected. And he helped give a lot of ideas about what mattered to a younger John Steinbeck. And he would make his money by just selling stuff from the seashore to high school labs, the different fish and things that would live there along the coast. And that's how he made his money. Really an elegant human being. And so they went on a research expedition in the Sea of Cortez, and they wrote a book together called The Log of the Sea of Cortez. And it's absolutely one of my favorite things that Steinbeck ever did, because I think Ricketts is just such a beautiful character. And you see Ricketts in a number of his books, and I'll mention some of them as they come up, such as, for instance, Cannery Row, which is maybe the first book to read by Steinbeck if you haven't read it. It a bit presages the rucksack revolution and the Dharma bums and the beats coming, but he wrote this in 45. So he was really ahead of the curve with these like down and out guys in California hanging out around Ed Ricketts' lab. But Cannery Row is a beautiful, beautiful book, and it was my first taste of the Doc character of Ed Ricketts. The follow-up to that was Sweet Thursday, which was also really good. After the war, he wrote The Pearl, which I would say is a modern fable. It's impressive work of art, for sure. And then it was soon after that that he wrote East of Eden in 276 days, and it's a big, fat book, but it's another really beautiful one set in California, and about a family. And it's considered his magnum opus. So if you read some of the others, East of Eden would be the giant one to read. It's probably what got him the Nobel Prize. And around this time, also he did the Acts of King Arthur and his Noble Knights, which I've mentioned on here before. So if you want a really good version of the King Arthur tales. And he wrote a travelogue in 1960 called Travels with Charlie, and it's such a touching little book. Charlie is his dog, and so he just drives around the country in an old camper, and he just meets people because he's John Steinbeck and he's good at meeting people. And he showed what the country was like at that time, and there were some really beautiful people and scenes that he found. But he ended in New Orleans during the time of integration of the schools there, and it's so horrible to even remember. There would just be some old white ladies every day who were called the Harpies, and they would sit every day that the young black kids were going to this school under police guard or National Guard, for their safety. These old white ladies would sit there and try to outdo each other every day in the nastiest, most evil things they could say to these young black kids walking into school. Steinbeck was so on the side of civil rights, and it's just horrible to see how public the evil was. And then finally, his last book was The Winter of Our Discontent, and it is not a happy one, as you can imagine from the title, but it examines the moral decline in the U.S., and it again is a very powerful book. The last thing I'll talk about is his Nobel Prize. So he got the Nobel Prize in 1962, but the reaction from literary critics was not good. The New York Times especially said, why would they give the award to someone whose limited talent in his best books is watered down by 10th-rate philosophizing? And so they really pushed back a lot of the people of American letters. And then Steinbeck, when he was asked one day at the announcement if he deserved the Nobel Prize, he said, frankly, no. But I guess what happened later is that the Nobel Prize, the archives were opened in 2012, so they opened them 50 years later, and it turns out that Steinbeck was a bit of a compromise choice because they had a short list and it wasn't that great. It included Robert Graves, Lawrence Durrell, both of who I like, the French dramatist Jean Anouilh, who I don't know, and the Danish author Karen Blixen, who published under the name Isaac Dinson. And she is wonderful. She was, when she was called the Hemingway of Africa, Hemingway said, no, I'm the Isaac Dinson of the States. She's one of the best short story writers who ever lived. But none of them were obvious winners, and I wouldn't say any of them quite deserved the Nobel Prize, and so they chose Steinbeck out of that lot. I might have given it to Durrell over that, but Steinbeck has more lasting power than Durrell does. We're still reading Steinbeck, and not that many people are reading Lawrence Durrell, though I still love him. And so that was the controversy. They didn't think he should have got it. But overall, he did leave an amazing body of work that was just so focused on people and what makes them great, but also what makes them horrible, and dreaming of a better world to come. And the reason I have his signature tattooed on my leg here is because he's one of the most inspirational authors that I've ever read. So hope you enjoy, and if you want to share your favorites, I'd love to hear them. Oh, I forgot one. The Short Reign of Pippin IV. This is a great satirical look at French politics. As someone who lives in France, it's very funny. It's a slim little book. It's very easy to read, and it is very funny because it is about an amateur astronomer who turns out to be the last living descendant of the kings. And because of a big constitutional crisis, they finally decide, let's just bring back the monarchy. And so this guy who was just living his life all of a sudden is the king of France again in the modern era, and about what he does with the role and what it's like and how he finally, well, I won't give away the end, but it is a hilarious little book and one of Steinbeck's best looks at politics in general.